And to discuss the Prime Minister's strong message on tackling terrorism, we have with us in the studio Ambassador Pinak Ranjan Chakravarti, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. There is already the belief that there's a shift in the center of gravity towards Asia in world affairs. Now, in that context, you know, the recent happenings, all this terrorist activity, and the response also, one has to gauge it in that new shift of balance. In that respect, the Prime Minister's message very clearly saying that, you know, no sanctuaries, no funds, no access to arms, basically squeeze the terrorists. How sound and how strong is this message?
Basically, it's to deny the terrorists oxygen.
Absolutely.
And that oxygen is finance, that oxygen is sanctuary, and that oxygen is publicity. Now, that is why the social media becomes so important, because that has become the recruiting forum for many of these people. And since we cannot control everything that is put on the social media, and that is why the cyber security part of it is also extremely important, because these new tools, these new digital tools are of course a very positive development for the world and for humanity, but it is also helping the terrorists to recruit. And so that is a problem area, and for that we need a lot more cooperation, intelligence sharing between all these countries. And just I would end here by saying that you mentioned Asia. Of course, let us not forget Syria and Iraq are in Asia.
Absolutely.
And that is and it's happening in Asia. So hence the cooperation in Asia is important, although much of that activity is directed towards Europe and other countries. But we will not be immune from this.
And the Prime Minister also sent out the message that one shouldn't balance terrorism against, you know, political considerations. That gives a sort of legitimacy towards the terrorists. This is the important message that's coming out. I mean, state sanctuaries for terrorism.
Unfortunately, many states, I will not name them here, but of course Pakistan is the prime example of trying to use terrorism as a tool for state policy or as a tool of foreign policy. Now, many other countries have done it by helping terrorist groups, by doing, you know, this whole regime change business that the Western countries started, basically led to arming of these Al-Qaeda fringe groups, etc., which finally, and in fact the 2003 invasion of Iraq really led to the formation of the Al-Qaeda there, which later on became the IS or the Islamic State, which then went into Syria as well, using up and coalescing with other groups that were already conducting violent operations against the government. So that is the genesis of all this.
Now, on the one hand, we see what military alliances being formed, you know, in the fight against ISIS and airstrikes. On the other hand, we also need to work with youth who are actually being led astray. You did mention the social media.
Yes.
To what extent, you know, is work being done in this regard, or actually what really needs to be done here?
I think we need to organize the community leaders who are obviously in touch with the community, who give the, let's say, the Friday sermon in mosques, etc. But it's also a moot point that the madrasas and other sort of, you know, the masjids, etc., are not really the recruiting ground anymore. I think the social media is the recruiting ground. Hence, but to send out a message to the young people that this is not correct, this is not Islam, and this kind of a jihad is not permitted in Islam. I mean, what is happening in Syria and what the IS is trying to do.
So, well, the Prime Minister says that India will be a part of the ASEAN dialogue on security, and that's an important aspect. Also, he sent out a message, you know, that the sea lanes and maritime security in India is going to play its bit. How important is this, first of all? How would you look at it?
Well, India is basically sending a reassuring message that the Indian Navy has already been acting against piracy, keeping sea lanes of communication open. Let us not forget, 60% of the world trade now goes through the Indian Ocean. And hence it is very important, including for us and for other countries in this region, to keep the sea lanes free from interference by pirates and other kind of. He also talked about the common goods, you know, the passages and navigation rights, etc. So I think that's a very important point he was making, because after all, today we talk about the Indo-Pacific region. That is the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean forming a particular strategic community
Sure.
and a strategic area.
Two things. One, let's first look at the bilateral that happened in Malaysia today. This comes after the ASEAN as well as the ASEAN-India summits and the East Asia summits. And then, the higher level of cooperation between the two countries, both in terms of depth as well as in terms of the levels and the frequency of interaction. How would you look at, the future of India-Malaysian relations post this visit?
I think we heard that both the prime ministers going on record saying that they would like to take this to a strategic level and to higher levels, obviously. And given the changes that Prime Minister Modi is trying to bring about, the domestic reforms, etc., that he's trying to bring about, trying to attract foreign direct investment. Malaysian companies are already involved in India in the infrastructure sector, particularly in the road sector. Now he's asking them to come and build other infrastructure. India will need all the help that we can get to build infrastructure of different kinds. And Malaysia is particularly good at it. And Malaysian companies have already proven themselves in this field.
And Singapore being an example to India. I mean, Prime Minister says size doesn't matter. I mean, look where Singapore has gone. What really can one learn from Singapore's progress in terms of, from the point of view of climate change, for one?
Well, let me first say that we can learn a lot from Singapore, and because Singapore provides such a comfortable and a transparent and a non-corrupt administration, that is why you have 4,000 Indian companies working out of Singapore.
Right.
Because it is easy to work in Singapore as long as you are
ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business. So Singapore has prospered primarily because of that.
Yes.
And the fact that there is no corruption, virtually no corruption. Singapore is as one of the top 5 countries where, in the list of countries where there is very little corruption. And so that is one of the attractive parts of Singapore. And we obviously, and a disciplined society and a clean, in fact, Prime Minister mentioned in one of his speeches about the Swachh Bharat program, where he said he was also inspired by what has happened in Singapore.
Absolutely.
And he's talked very highly of Singapore, praised what it has done. And I think we have a lot to learn. And it's clear that Singapore will provide, and Singapore was one of the first countries which actually welcomed India into ASEAN and this whole engagement.
And this is going to be a strategic partnership from tomorrow onwards.
It already is.
It already is.
It already is, because Indian and Singapore Defence Forces actually exercise together. Singapore Air Force actually flies in Indian airspace to do exercises, because Singapore has very little airspace, being a small country. So there is already a very advanced defence cooperation sort of a setup that we have.
And finally, Prime Minister will be heading to Paris later on, and that's also, he says that there should be a strong message sent out from world leaders that COP21, people are not getting afraid of terrorism, and that's also symbolic in a sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that the French government and everybody in the world would be very, very clear on this, that the show must go on. I mean, in the sense that COP must go on, whatever is happening must go on. But clearly, it will be a huge target for these terrorists. And one has to be very careful. And I think the French government is going to take all the measures necessary to ensure the safety of this summit. And as for climate change, I think we have also sent out a message that while we were never part of the problem, because we didn't pollute, but we would like to be part of the solution.
We leave it there. Thank you very, very much, Ambassador Pinakaranjan Chakrabarti, for being with us.
Thank you.